Why should there be this separation between our daily lives and the companies we invest in that apparently should only maximize money? I just don't see it.
I might contradict a position that I've held for recent years. I've for a long time not liked staggered boards and been pretty confident in my reasons for not liking staggered boards. But this has given me reason to reconsider or learn or change my mind or be perfectly hedged.
We believe that the classical results in empirical corporate governance are not clear anymore for several reasons.
Does the board of directors have a legal duty to maximize shareholder value?
We can't have a legal regime that will allow a management to pursue other goals, then it doesn't matter whether they should or not, because we can't.
B Corps are new, or benefit corporations. So you could have said, a few years back, you would have said, there's nothing like this. Now there is something like this, so maybe in the future there'll be more. I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I just don't believe this Friedman separation. I mean, I used to think it was great, but now I don't.
What I want to take a look at is a staggered board, particular legislation that was adopted in 1990, supported largely by the law firm of Wachtell Lipton, which flew what the New York Times reported is a small handful of legislators at literally a midnight session in Massachusetts. They imposed on all firms incorporated in Massachusetts what the shareholders were unwilling to give them. That is, they imposed a staggered board.
So here's my main comment, which is thank you. Okay, and let me explain why I'm actually very happy to see this paper, which you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
There are some defensive tactics which requires the shareholder approvals. Example, the adoption of a staggered board. So when you have this shareholder approval, this is a sign of commitment of these shareholders not to early terminate the relationship with the managers. So the fact that there is the approval of these shareholders is a good signal. On the opposite, there are other defensive tactics where the shareholder approvals is not required. And so we cannot infer that there is this original commitment. This is the strong motivation for this paper. You will say why.
Foreign capital gets labeled as hot money. If you go back to Asian crisis or other episodes, you've seen this labeling. That maybe foreign capital is interested in short-term gains at the cost of long-term investing. Does it lead to lower capex? No. Does it lead to jobs being cut? No. Does it lead to less patents, less innovation? No.
What's interesting about China is that the corporate bond market has developed massively in spite of very weak institutional infrastructure of this sort. So China today has the third largest corporate bond market in the world after the US and Japan. Our argument is very simple. We argue that a state-centric network really with the state at the center of the network has substituted for formal institutional infrastructure in China, allowing massive growth or promoting massive growth of this market. So the result is a huge but institutionally very fragile market.
So we're still going to have to be trying to figure out how do we measure governance, and we don't have to pull it into an index. But that may end up being a useful thing to do. It's going to be very hard to avoid because one of the things you can't do is just look at governance elements one at a time. The second thing that you could do is throw a bunch of elements into a single regression and see if anything predicts anything, and the answer is nothing will predict anything.
Of course, we can discuss about the usefulness of remuneration committees, and even more, we could discuss about the requirement of remuneration consultants, which, according to the Commission, should also be independent. So companies should disclose that they have used remuneration consultants and that these consultants were independent. Now, we could argue, has it got a meaning for controlled corporations? And in my opinion, yes. And I have some experience of remuneration committees. I must say it was one of the most frustrating professional experiences in my life.
Do I make more or less money as a shareholder because I have more or less takeovers because of these provisions? The second element would have a moving part. The only moving part is going to be the price, the premium, but careful, the premium fixing the firm. So a firm that's going to be taken over regardless of whether they have a provision or not, is this provision going to give better price or worse price in this particular deal?
What if market conditions for financing are such that we can refinance a lot of things extremely rapidly? Conceivably overnight, but extremely rapidly. And the second thing is, what if the vertically integrated firm is not as important in 2018 as it was in 1970?
I guess the real objective of the paper is to, first of all, see whether there is a specific role of this aspect which had been neglected by the theory within the testing of a model of strategic debt, but also, since we are not at all wed to this model, whether actually the entire model doesn't fly. So, which is, I mean, if the firm is actually constrained, debt constrained, and if it doesn't use debt strategically, then we show that actually we should expect a completely the opposite results.
Right, we're not taking a position on whether accountability to shareholders is good or bad. We're instead looking at this as something that shareholders have been very much behind. Why is it that they're behind this? Does it make a difference in terms of what shareholders claim they want, which is more board responsiveness?
What we're trying to study is there a political effect on competition? How much sort of, if you keep the technology constant, so you keep a sector constant, and imagine, and this is clearly not true in every sector, but imagine for a second that you have a market in every country which is separate, is sort of the competition in each market driven by political factors, given the sector.
The main point of my talk is going to be that we really need to rethink about what is the theoretical structure that we have at the back of our minds when we talk about corporate governance.
What does it mean? CEOs and executive characteristics can be measured. The results suggest that CEOs are different, that top management characteristics are, in some sense, complements, not substitutes. Controlling for characteristics, women are less likely to become CEOs. Is that discrimination or labor supply? Don't know.
I think the fundamental governance challenge in inviting private capital into developing infrastructure is precisely the challenge of marrying the legitimate private profit motive with what is the public purpose of the infrastructure. That's really the governance challenge. So how do you create space for the private investor to make money and also protect the public interest? And that requires a degree of sophistication that clearly was not available in India.
The problem is not the government will expropriate the operator. The problem is the government gives too sweet a deal to the operator. There have been many shocking examples of that, in particular in Chicago. And there the problem is you have corruption. It's a form of corruption. Again, that's where you want to have something like a multilateral development bank who will be the policeman, who will police this kind of corruption, make sure that you don't give away too sweet deals.
What you need is much more development time, preparation time in Africa. Our role is also, which is very costly for us, is to spend a lot of time just to develop the project so it becomes bankable. If the state of Texas comes out with the project, it's bankable because they have the institutions to prepare that. And that's where Professor Bolton's suggestion comes in, is that these development institutions should spend a significant amount of their capacity and money on developing bankable projects.
Right.
Where I can see that there is maybe a need for further governance in this area, and where companies are actually not doing their job very well at the current time, is, for example, if you deal with sensitive customer data. That's something you're allowed to outsource that, to put that in somebody else's hands. But what happens if there is a breach? I mean, you're really not under control of it. And I do think that I understand why there is now so much regulation actually happening. They haven't really put it into practice, and it remains to be seen how effective it is. But I do think there is actually a gap in practice.
Whereas in Sweden, we are enormously engaged in the companies. We actually chair the nomination committee, and we drive the process ourselves. We don't do that in other countries, in Nasdaq or ABB. But in the UK, my perception is that you're even more in the back seat as a shareholder. You almost read, the nominations when everybody else is reading them. I mean, it's something that the board is enormously independent, and so in that aspect, it's a different world.
But he's looking backwards. I'm looking forwards to the infinite future. Why have these benefit corporations? Things may be changing.